Hi, my name is Avery Gibbs. I'm an artist, and today we're going to be going over 3 tips for making art that is amazing, but more specifically, art that is unique. And just before we get started, if you're interested in learning a little bit about what I do and my art, feel free to check out my website, averygibbs.com. Link will be in the description. Let's get started. My first tip for making art that is unique is to be loose about it, at least in the beginning. This part is all about experimentation. Obviously, in order to make art that is unique, you have to make art that has something about it that's different or that stands out. And so, of course, you have to figure out what you're going to do that's different. And this is hard because there's lots and lots of art out there that's been done already. How do you possibly think of something that's new and interesting? And on top of that, something that's good. So the answer is that you just have to experiment. And with all that said, when you're experimenting, don't worry too much about all this bigger picture stuff that I just talked about. Worry about growing personally as an artist. Try doing things that are different for you. And that doesn't even necessarily mean completely changing what you already do. It could mean trying something different or changing one aspect of what you are already doing. Maybe you decide to try something different with your technique. Maybe you decide to try working with subject matter that you wouldn't usually work with. Or maybe you just decide to try something different in your approach to your work. But be loose and have fun. Don't be afraid to try something a little weird either. Don't worry too much if your idea seems silly or ridiculous or you don't know what it means, as long as it's something that you find interesting. I've found that some of my best ideas for paintings that were different and interesting were ideas that seemed a little silly at first. But if an idea seems silly, that can actually be a good sign, because it means that most people wouldn't think of doing it, and even if they did think of doing it, they probably wouldn't. So if you do it, it'll set you apart from the rest. Of course, there's always some point where you might draw a line as to how weird you're willing to go, but that's obviously up to you. And also, make a point of having fun in your experimenting. Don't treat it too seriously. If you have fun, you can't lose. Even if your experiment doesn't amount to anything, you at least had fun while you were doing it. And if it does amount to something, well then you've had a breakthrough and you enjoyed doing it. As you experiment, at a certain point, you'll come across something that makes you think, oh, I might be onto something with this. And when you get to that point, if you feel strongly about what you've come up with, then you can shift your focus over to building on this idea and refining it until it potentially becomes a central part of your work. Tip number 2 is to know the fundamentals of the medium in which you're working. I know this might seem a bit basic, but it is important. Knowing the fundamentals on its own isn't going to do that much for you in terms of making your work unique. But you do have to know and understand the fundamentals of your medium in order to do the experimenting that we talked about in the last step. So if it's painting that we're talking about, you still have to know composition and how to use color effectively. In order to find your own unique brand of art, you have to step outside of the framework of simply emulating a pre-existing style. And once you do that, all you have left are these fundamentals to give you structure to follow. And maybe as part of your experimenting, you decide to completely disregard one of these fundamentals, and that's okay. That can actually work. Every fundamental has a purpose. Maybe that purpose doesn't serve you in what you're trying to accomplish in this particular instance, but you have to know the fundamentals in order to understand when disregarding one of them is appropriate and has a chance to work to your advantage. Now, my last tip for making art that is unique is to let your personality show in your art. This is probably the biggest thing I want you to take away from this video, because whether you like it or not, your art is always going to be a reflection of you. So you might as well embrace this idea. A big part of who you are is your personality, and part of what makes you unique is your personality. So let your personality show in your art and help your art to be unique. You can do this in more than one way. You can let your personality show through the content of your work or the subject matter that you choose to focus on. You can also let your personality show through the way in which you portray this subject matter or the style of your artwork. An example of an artist who makes use of both these things that comes to mind for me is an artist named Brianna Bruce. I actually went to school with Brianna, and there was a little while where we had a couple of the same classes, and in between would work in the studio at the same time. And she was one of the first artists I can remember that stood out to me as having a lot of personality in her work. Her paintings were so playful and humorous, both in what they were picturing and how she would paint them. I remember in the beginning there would be all these nude figures in funny situations with each other, and their bodies would be painted all disproportionately, like, you know, one would have a really small head and giant feet with these huge toes, and another one would be something different. But her paintings were so playful and interesting, and I had the added benefit of knowing her and seeing her work and seeing how she integrated her personality, her sense of humor into her artwork. And as a result of her doing this, I think it made her work really unique. I don't know anybody else who paints the same as Brianna. Seeing the way that she made art had a big influence on me. But that's all to say that it goes a long way to let your true self show in your artwork. Sometimes it's a matter of deciding or figuring out what part of your personality you want to come through in your work. So Brianna benefited the most from allowing her sense of humor to come through in her work, but maybe you're someone who's more suited to focus on a more serious side of yourself. See if you can figure out what parts of your personality have the most potential for producing engaging ideas, and then focus on trying to cultivate that in your work. Another point to add is that not showing your true self in your artwork is a lot like when you try to hide your true self in real life. You might be able to pull it off for a little while, but eventually people can kind of see through it. And when you're holding back like this, it keeps you from being able to make the kind of connections that you otherwise could make if you were being more open. One of the number one goals of any kind of art is to make something that people connect with. Does putting your true self out there put you at greater risk of rejection? Yes, it does. But it also gives you a better chance of making real connections with people, and the same goes for your art. And that brings me to the point that I wanted to end on, which is just to remember that anytime something is unique, there are always going to be people who don't understand it or who don't get it at first, and that's okay. You don't have to please everyone. As long as your art is getting positive, enthusiastic responses from some people, especially if those people are like-minded to you, and as long as what you're doing in your art is something that you find to be engaging and exciting, that's what you should focus on. So that's everything for today. Thanks for watching this video. If you like the video, remember to like the video. Again, if you're interested in learning more about my art, you can go to my website, click the link in the description. Best of luck in all your art making, and I'll see you in the next video.